Are you looking for true personal freedom? The freedom to design a life you truly desire? Then you're absolutely in the right place. True personal freedom comes from when you take 100% responsibility and control of your money and your mind. Here you're going to learn ideas, tips, and wisdom that's going to help you bridge the gap from where you are now to your dream life in the future. My name is Randy Wilson, and welcome to the RichMind podcast.
Okay, welcome back everybody to the RichMind podcast. And today I have a super guest. Today I have with me Andrew McWilliams. Andrew is the founder of the McWilliams Group Real Estate and Andrew McWilliams Coaching. He's also been achieved the status of 1% among the top Remax agents internationally. So to say that he's had some success selling some real estate and his branch of Remax is an understatement. So I'm super excited to bring Andrew to you today for the listeners. We're just having a conversation that every time we get a chance to talk, it's an amazing thing as far as talking about financial education, talking about personal development, talking about goals, talking about priorities, talking about all kinds of things that I know that this conversation is going to be super valuable for you today. So Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Randy. I'm very honored to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be a great conversation. So first off, can you just give everybody a little bit of color? Tell everybody a little bit about yourself, kind of where you've been, just a little bit more details about Andrew. Let everybody get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah. Well, I've been in Colorado, I think half my life now. I grew up in Northeast Georgia on a dirt road. Like you might imagine, there was a television show, I think back in the 80s, Dukes of Hazzard. And that fairly reflects maybe not me exactly, but I definitely grew up around those people. I tease that I took Daisy Duke to the prom, and that's not far off. So that was growing up, kind of rural Northeast Georgia. But when I found Colorado through a series of events, I decided that this is where I should have been born. I really had an experience where I one day I'd come to visit a friend who lived in Denver, and then he was working during the day, and so I would go explore, and so I had this little rental car, and I remember it was back when they rented, I think it was like 1.5 liter or something. It was like this little rental car that was real. I mean, Yugo would be a powerhouse against it. I don't even know what it was, but I remember trying to drive up I-70 outside of Denver one day when I was going exploring. I was going to go to Georgetown. And I remember I didn't think the car would literally climb. I was thinking I was going to start throwing things out the window. I had to put it down, had to put it from drive into low just to get it up I-70. And I got as far as Georgetown, and I kind of drove through Georgetown, and I didn't go very far, but there was some switchbacks above town. And I went out on one of the switchbacks, and there was a rock, and I went out and I sat on the rock, and I'm looking over this town of Georgetown, which was a 1800s, kind of a mining town type thing. And I thought, I should have been born here. I mean, I just felt like home. It was amazing. It was and so within a year, I lived in Denver. I rented a lower level, I guess it was the basement of this really nice couple right at the edge of a popular lake, Sloan's Lake, which is just down from the center part of Denver. And so that's what got me here. And I literally, this has felt like home, and home has felt like visiting pretty much since then. Like Randy said, I've been selling real estate for about 20 years. I started in a Remax office and ended up being a managing broker for 2 offices, and then had some success where for the past 5 years, we've been in the top 1% each year with the Remax brand. Left Remax about a year ago, but this year I was awarded not even a 5-star professional, whatever it is. But anyway, it's top 1% of kind of the Denver metro market for 12 years. So some success, but I was as excited about developing agents. I had, when I started the office, we had about 24. When I started being the managing broker, we grew that to almost 70. And I started 40 brand new licensees out of real estate school. and I developed a training program for them I called it a boot camp. And my goal was to teach them everything they needed to know in 1 week in order to be successful agents. And then I would meet with them, and kind of mentor and coach, and felt before I left, I had finally developed a couple of those agents to outperforming me, which was what I was looking for. That was when I felt like, I felt pretty good about the success at that point, and thought, okay, now I've gotten something done to get people to, advance beyond you and what you're doing. So about a year ago, I stepped away. There was some mismatched perspectives and philosophy with my partner, and different life stage type things. But it was very interesting. I had a heart issue. So I've had cancer. But I don't feel like I should raise my hand in the room when they ask you if you've had cancer. Mine was handled with a surgery, and with no, a clean sense that time. But I had this kind of evasive heart thing. It was like an electrical problem, and they kept searching for it. And I went through lots and lots of different tests and different things, and it was just chasing it for about 18 months. And I mean, I literally went through all the steps and everything that they could imagine. And finally, after I resigned that position, my heart issue cleared away, because it was, in my mind, my self-diagnosis with the Dr. Andrew hat on, which means nothing, is, it was, I basically, so in the Bible, it talks about being unequally yoked. And a lot of times people have taught that means, if people are married and one person's a believer and one person's not a believer. But I think that principle goes to lots of other significant relationships. And so the lack of, I don't know if it's, you'd say synchronicity or just direction or perspective or philosophy, was so challenging to me. And I was unaware of it. If you'd asked me, was I under stress? I don't know that I would have said I was. I knew I was frustrated by some things, and I had a vision. I've always operated out of vision and story, and I had a vision and a story for what to do and what we should do and what we could do, and continue to see growth and success and expansion and so forth. And that was at odds with. There was a specific afternoon cocktail that I remember where I was just kind of stunned at the starkness of the difference of our perspectives, and so it's just one of those things that then about 18 months later, which was about a year ago, I left that brokerage and resigned that position and stepped away from the partnership and started a little boutique office here. And February 1st was a year. And so we are, now in an independent brokerage, my wife and I, and we've got a team around us, but really enjoying the next step and the next story. So yeah. I don't know. I think I just talked a lot about a lot of things.
That's a lot of things. So the word that comes to my mind was awareness,
mm-hmm.
right? You became aware of an issue, right?
Yeah.
You weren't sure that it was even happening, but I can imagine, like you mentioned that cocktail, the moment you were having that cocktail and you just had that kind of epiphany that hit you that, something isn't quite right. And then your body was trying to tell you in some significant ways, because I'm sure that could have prolonged into something very severe.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was really an awareness that then you were able to take action on.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I always, I am a learner. I a critical thinker. But again, I also understand, I really live off of philosophy. I think I'm pretty discerning about other folks, and there's nothing unethical, dishonest, less than trustworthy about this partner. Very well esteemed, great person. I mean, it's just like I said, the best way I can describe it from my background is just unequally yoked. It just wasn't an alignment of purpose and direction, and I didn't realize at the time that would lead me into a stress-induced heart condition. But honestly, that's literally what it was. And then once I removed myself from the position, actually kind of at the point of making the decision, which happened in November before we actually left the office in February, or at the beginning of February, just cleared away. And so that just goes to show you how, stress and living outside your purpose. I think a lot of people live lives that are that they've kind of passively accepted. It's like, well, you get out, the traditional path, I'm going to get out of school and then I'm going to get a job. Well, then you get a job and that's harmless enough, right? Because, you think you need to make money, and then you make commitments and obligations, and then you end up, stuck because you're in the job, and the job, pays for the obligations and the commitments. And then, you wake up 20 or 30 years later and your health is not good and your philosophy is a wreck and your outlook and things are maybe dismal, or at least not inspiring. And it's just, you've accepted, a life with, kind of passively instead of designing one. And so, I think that was another critical time. There've been lots of different critical times and events, and each one, there was a period of time, there's this list out there that says, these are the 20 things that if you've got, 3 or 4 of these going on, that can significantly impact your emotional health or wellness or whatever. And I remember several times I've looked, I've thought of that list, and I'm like, well, I'm ringing, 10 or 12 at the moment, as far as the stressors go. But I would rather live life actively and, at the risk of stressors and so forth than comfort zone. So.
Absolutely. So I'm a huge advocate of control, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need to take control, and that starts in the mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
The awareness part, being aware or becoming aware of your situation.
Yeah.
And then be able to take control and then take action based on your obligations, like you said, which then turns into the money piece of
Mm-hmm.
making sure that you have control of understanding where money comes from, how it's generated, why it's generated. All of those things is super crucial in terms of living this life by design versus
Mm-hmm.
by default, which I totally resonate with 100%. So I definitely appreciate you sharing that for sure. So what I like to do is I like to
Mm-hmm.
start off with everybody with some 3 questions that will help kind of, this so far has been awesome so far. So I'm excited to hear what you're going to say or how you're going to answer these questions. And then we'll pick them apart, go a little bit deeper and share some wisdom with the folks. But the first question I usually always ask is, who has had the biggest influence on your life?
Yeah, that was a tough one. Several names, several faces come to mind. I mean, I've enjoyed some good coaches, some good mentors, some good ministers and counselors and different influencers in my life. But I think that my who would be God, and that's because I feel like God has invited me into a bigger story. I think before I was aware, that there was, through kind of like senses of transcendence, that there was more, and I, outside of my more limiting beliefs, that you grow up in an environment and you're somewhat a product of that environment, or maybe mostly a product of the environment. And so you don't understand your limitations. You don't understand, kind of the box that you might be in. And so I felt early on, God had a bigger story, a bigger plan, a bigger purpose, and invited me into that story. I think we live in small stories in most of our lives, and some people never get out of a small story. But yeah, so I would say God invited me into larger stories, to expand my philosophy, to expand my perspective, to understand what I would say is a limitless possibility. I don't feel like there's any limits at all. I am the only source of limitation. And so, it's, I have to grow. I have to grow in order to experience something different as far as an outcome goes. I do believe in cause and effect. so that is something that I would say, and that was early. That was really early, probably teenage years. I sensed more, and I knew that there was more. And actually, I started praying specifically that God would develop me to the maximum of my potential, that He would use me for the greatest purpose that I could, be used for. And a couple of other things around those two prayers, but that was something I probably prayed consistently for several years. And that was without knowing even necessarily what that meant. I was not introduced to personal development until I was 40. And so this was in my teens. And so I really, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know, but I knew there was more. And so there was, the series of events and things that happened along the way have kind of began to define that for me in better ways and more vocabulary and easier terms to describe. But yeah, that's my answer to that one.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I appreciate you sharing.
Lots of people at different points, but overarching, God inviting me into a bigger story.
That's great. And I can't wait to dig in a little bit more about that story, where you've kind of come from, where you're actually going and where you've been, right? That's going to be super fun. So the next question is, what has been the greatest challenge in your life and what have you learned from it?
Well, that goes right back to the first answer. I think it's Jim Rohn that says that it's not what you don't know, it's what you know that just ain't so. Is that Jim? I think it might be. And so I think unlearning, relearning, peeling back layers of kind of false narrative, I guess, about myself, about the way the world works, about limits or no limits. I mean, I saw someone post, basically, they were, it was a post around some cocktails, and I've already said cocktails twice in about 20 minutes. I don't overindulge, I don't think, but who knows? That's subjective, right? But there was a poster, it was around cocktails and cigars, and it was kind of like, this is kind of the life I was given, and so happiness comes from just being, making the most of what you've been given or enjoying. And I'm sitting there going like, oh my gosh, it was like, no. No. No, you don't just say, well, it sucks, but I'll drink a beer and do the best I can. I mean, it's just, it's just, no, that's just, I just think that's just so, but that was kind of, probably a perspective that I wasn't too far from, for much of my life, was just, it's kind of, these opportunities come to you and you wait on them, and there's this plan, and you can screw it up, but you don't really know what it's going to, I mean, anyway, it's just, there's several things around there, but yeah, I think that it was the challenge was being slow to get to people, the voices that I needed, like the Jim Rohns and Earl Nightingale and Napoleon Hill and some of that teaching, and some of those concepts and things. And it took me a while to get there. I feel like I'm a late start. I'm a very late start.
And I would say I'm a late start as well. I wasn't exposed to any of this until definitely into my late 30s, going into 40s. And so I would 100% fall into that camp as well, that it's not, and it was not something that was in my circle of influence. Hence the reason why I'm trying to produce some content, right? Get some messages out there, get it shared. I think a lot of folks would potentially make some different decisions in their life if they knew that there were different options, so there, that level of awareness, right? That
Absolutely
there are different ways of doing, being, becoming that I didn't know.
Right.
Yeah. And it's just super exciting to then try to share those things. So I'm a latecomer too, Andrew. Don't beat yourself over with that, man. It's all good. We're definitely moving on from here, right? So that's super fun. Exactly. So that might tie into then the third and the final question is that if you could go back to your 20-year-old self. So one thing that I try to do is I try to give wisdom as much as I possibly can back to that younger generation. And so the idea with this question is, if you could go back to your 20-year-old self, say that somebody isn't aware of what we're even talking about today. You've mentioned Jim Rohn, Earl Nightingale, and Napoleon Hill, those types of philosophers and those types of philosophy. if you could go back to that 20-year-old self and say, hey, Andrew, and shake him, say, this is what I wish you knew, or what I've discovered and you need to know now. Can you think of anything that, like, one piece of wisdom nugget that you'd like to share?
Well, the interesting thing is my son is a 20-year-old. He will be, he turns 20 in July. And so I actually thought about what I want for him when I was thinking about this. Sometimes you wonder if, I think the journey would have been different and maybe better, but I don't discount having to have the or have the stories, have the narrative, have the journey that I did have to get me to here. And so I'm not a person that looks back at 20 and says, well, I lost all this chance. I mean, I did. I feel like I'm late starting. So that's obviously being prejudiced against that timing. But I think being a critical thinker, I think is huge. I think that learning to just not accept whatever it is important. But I also like the read, listen, and go to seminars. I think that if I had, read more books, read some of the right books, if I had listened to, at the time of when I was 20, it would have been, it would have been the transition from cassettes to CDs. But listen to more cassettes and more CDs and gone to seminars. And that's one thing now that I lament is the reaction to the pandemic has been that people don't gather as much, and it's kind of hard to get people to gather. People would rather, be online or whatever than get in a room together. But I think there's synergy and energy in a room. And I think getting to rooms and when I was in my 20s, I could have gone to see Jim Rohn. I could have seen some of these individuals in person that I didn't find out about until, several years after Jim passed and otherwise. So I think that, read, listen, go to seminars, and be a critical thinker. And I think those are things that are so important. And maybe I had a little bit of the critical thinking going, but I don't know that I had. Well, I know for sure that I didn't have all the voices that now I rely on and really feed me, on a daily basis, because I push all this content toward me every day, so that it's always in front of me, and I'm always either hearing something again and benefiting from it again, or hearing something for the first time.
Now, you'd mentioned, and I wholeheartly believe in the getting in the rooms, right?
Yeah.
To learn, shake hands,
Yes.
Get experiences. Do you have a focus? Do you try to stick more in the quote unquote personal development side, or is it more for your personal or professional development for the real estate, your business, that type of thing? Do you have a kind of a mix or an idea of, say, someone doesn't necessarily know even where to begin? Where do I go to think about what kind of rooms that I can possibly get into? Have you had any experiences that you might be?
Yeah, I would say work on yourself first. Even if your aim is financial success, I mean, well, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to have the wisdom to use the success? Are you, in the money that comes from success, or the opportunity, or, are you going to be in a room with someone who can help you, but, you're not personally developed to the point of understanding the quiet wisdom that you're in the room with, that you should really, pay attention to. So I would say work on yourself first. I think that's the beginning. And, so that's where I would spend. So I guess I would call that, I would say personal development. Language means a lot to me, and words and vocabulary and the way you speak about things are so important. I'm not a self-help guy, but I am a personal development guy. I don't think there's 12 steps to change your life or whatever, but I think, so I think that even in that, if you imagine a real bookstore, which, again, a dinosaur, get on that aisle. But I think the Jim Rohns, the Earl Nightingales, are super approachable, especially Jim, I think, is super approachable. I think anyone that picks up a Jim Rohn book it's the concepts are super approachable, super plain, super easy to understand, and very and very helpful. So yeah, work on yourself first.
Yeah,
I think some of the things that Jordan Peterson is doing, and I know that can be a controversial figure depending on who you're talking about, but some of the things he's doing with with vision, with personality, with traits. There's some powerful stuff there too.
Fantastic. Appreciate you sharing that for sure. Yeah, the Jim Rohn's, Earl Nightingales were definitely the eye-opening experiences that I had as well, right? Discovering things that they're put in ways that aren't aggressive, but at the same time, they're different. So it creates that critical thinking, creates that gap of, okay, where you currently are to where what possibility could actually be out there. You don't even realize that that's even a possibility. And it really gets you thinking, which is a lot of fun. So I definitely appreciate you asking that or answering that in that way for sure. So one part of your story, and we had the pleasure of being co-authors in the book Think Big. Yes. And one part of your story, and it goes along, actually comes back to a conversation you and I had. I think it was this last December, and you may or might not even remember this conversation, but this was super impactful for me. And I really would love for you to dig a little bit deeper into this. Was the moment you decided in your real estate business, this goes back to your real estate business, and you decided that you were going to stop playing small and you were going to step up into the larger estates, land, and how that one decision kind of pivoted everything for you, at least in your real estate business, right? When you shared that with me, that hit me like a 2x4 right in the middle of the forehead. As far as like, I would consider myself, I hold myself back because of thinking small, feeling small. So even the title, when I was presented with the title of joining the book of Think Big, it was like, yes, that's what I want. Think big, right? But I think that folks, myself included, tend to fall back into the thinking small, feeling small, and then acting small, which then is going to continue to get you the same small results. Your flip, when you made that decision to go for the larger properties, sales, hence the reason why you've had so much success in the Remax brand. Can you kind of go into that detail a little bit? Do you remember that conversation that we had?
Yeah, I do. And I remember, I mean, I'm sitting right now about, 4 miles from where I remember I could take you to the place where I made the decision, when my wife and I were driving along in a neighborhood here. And I have, if I look back at all my different, if I look at chapters of success, I would say, it was all about creating a story and then, making the decision and then living into that. Right. I think that, I think we live in story. And I think that a lot of times the story we tell ourselves or about the way the world works or about our potential or about anything is just not true. And it's because I think a lot of times we don't try to author a story. We passively take on the story that other people give us, whether that's a voice of someone who's well-meaning and maybe they're a family member and they just have a perspective and a philosophy that's really skewed and wrong. Or someone tells us we can't, or someone defines us, or we allow ourselves to be defined in any ways. And so, I feel like that is just one decision among several decisions that I've made. Like I said, if you look back at the chapters of success, each one is a story. Each one has a vision. It's like, you think, well, what if I did this, or why? I think I can change my world. I can change my reality. I can change. And in that case, it was, basically changed my price point, because I thought, well, and it's anything you do based upon commission sells. It's like, well, how expensive is your widget? If you can sell, the steps of selling are similar. Real estate is a very complex. Real estate has kind of become, and especially in the last 2-3 years when real estate was so hot, it seems non-complex. It seems like, anybody could do it. And why don't we just go to, turn real estate into like cars.com, because, you don't really need anybody to sell or do anything about that. And it's really not true, especially from a liability perspective and a lot of other things. But it's the same principles for a transaction, whether the transaction's $100,000 or the transaction's $1 million. It's literally the same steps. And so the idea was just like, well, why don't I just sell more expensive houses? Why not? We just do that. And so I just, and I think that I kind of follow a little philosophy called be, do, have, which is, be the person, figure out what you want to have, And then today, be the person that has that result. Take the actions that that person would take today, in this week, in this month, and then you have that result. And so, so then it was basically like, well, here's the result, the have that I wanted. Okay, who do I need to be? What do I need to do? What are my actions? And I was able to double my income twice in 5 years. And it's, and that's the other thing. I think a lot of people think that their trajectory has to be somewhat linear, or kind of like if you think the graph and there's the gradual increase of the line. And so one of the things I would challenge my agents with is you don't need to grow your business by 10% or 15%. I was talking to someone who said that they gave themselves, and this entrepreneur, and they said they gave themselves a 3% raise on their goals for income year over year. 3%. Like, why would you do that? They said, well, that's the kind of the cost of living raise I would have gotten if I'd stayed in my corporate job. And I'm thinking, no way. No way. In my mind, 3% is losing, right? It's just like you can double, you can triple. There's not it's not linear. It's not gradual. It's not a little bit more. And so there's really no reason why you can't double every time, right? Your success can double and not be incremental, right? And so that's what I learned. And then I would end up going, so we achieved this success, and it's one thing to achieve success. It's another thing to be consistent over a period of time. But I would go to these, I go to the international convention and whatnot, and I would sit in a room with these other performers who had reached some, and I'm sitting here with people who literally had sold 127 houses, and with a team of 20 people. And I'm like, well, there's me and Heather, and we sold 25 houses, and we had the same result. And that's all because of price point. It's all because of deciding to be the person who has the bigger outcome. And so one of the things that I've tried to do with agents, but then also with some other people that I'm talking to these days, I've got an appointment later today with someone, and I'm trying to talk to her about valuing herself more, and expecting more, and she'll get it. So
that's
yeah.
awesome. So it's that decision, right?
Yep.
Which leads then to the action. So it's the becoming first, right? So you have to have the vision. You have to have the vision of the destination, the idea, right? To have. But it's starting from the becoming. Who do I have to become today?
Yes.
To then start doing the actions, right? To then have the result, right? Yeah. And I love the idea of it not being linear, right?
It's just really not. I don't know where that comes from. I guess that's just from people thinking they should have a little bit more next year than they had this year, kind of a thing. But especially in a year like now, where, if you've got inflation probably at 10% or more. I know the official is 6 or 8 or whatever it is, this, whatever they're saying, but then I have to increase by 10% to stay the same. Right. So why would I look at that as a reasonable goal? Why would I want to do that? And why stick at 10% if my potential is double or triple? And it could be, right. And it is actually, it might be, limited just by how you learn and grow, and how you understand your need for change, and you find blind spots, and you work on blind spots, and you do the work. And so, but there's just no reason to think of growth as incremental. It's a false narrative.
So that leads me into we have a common mentor in David Nagel, who talks about, so then the first thought that comes to my mind, so I'm trying to put myself in outside shoes, thinking, okay, that sounds great. But, right, so then all the doubts and all the negativity starts crumbling around in your brain, and which then leads to inaction, which leads to the negative, So then it's a perpetual spiral going the negative direction. So David talks about the terror barrier, resistance, because that's usually the first instance when that thing starts to show up, the terror barrier, the negative thoughts, the negative beliefs, the stories that we've been discussing here today. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, when you made that decision, I would assume that you started to have possibly some doubts or some things that were creeping up in your mind, and how did you kind of work through those at that point?
Yeah, I don't recall doubt being huge. Maybe it was because, that's something that I'd seen happen before, in terms of finding solutions and experiencing change. I really think it goes back to voices and story. And I think you have to say, okay, where are the stories that are telling me, that are bringing me fear, bringing me that terror? Okay, what's the source of those? And, I like to tell folks that, think of it as a tape that's playing in your head, and then unplug that tape. I mean, just literally think of, okay, this is a tape. It's a negative tape. It's playing in my head. The story is coming from, it could be previous experience. I mean, it could be, well, I failed 9 times, Andrew. And so what makes this any different? Well, because just because you failed 9 times doesn't mean that that's not your story, really. I mean, it's just you failed 9 times. So failure is not something to be afraid of. Failure is education. Failure is, I think that you have to fail a lot in order to succeed, right? And so failure is not something to fear. But I think that, so you look at that, you say, okay, where's the stories coming from? You think of them as narratives or tapes that are playing in your head. And again, that's my coming up with tapes, right? So maybe these days it's whatever you want to, however you want to make the analogy that works for you.
Yeah.
And you
your
unplug them,
iPhone.
but then you have to then replace those. So you don't want to create a vacuum, right? So what a lot of people do is they say, well, I'm going to, and then I think part of that story problem is you got to get away from those people. There are people in your lives, and not that you have to leave your parents and never speak to them again, but don't let them influence you. Understand and be alert to, oh, here comes that thing that holds me back. Here comes the conversation. Here comes the same line of thought or whatever the communication is. And so I'm not going to let it touch me this time. I'm going to be alert to it. I'm going to separate it, intentionally, from something that I'm going to allow to influence me. And then I'm going, but then you have to replace, you create the vacuum, but you got to replace it with something else, or probably bigger terrors come in behind it. Right. So then that's why you have to find the voices, you have to find the influences and you do need people with skin on in your life that are those voices. You find the people that are also trying to grow and change. You associate yourself with them more. You schedule times. I mean, if you need to sit down and say, hey, I'm going to make myself once a week or twice a month or whatever that is, I'm going to have a conversation with someone who's going to be positive and someone who's also wanting to grow and change and become more and shares a philosophy. So you bring those people into your life, but especially if that's scarce or rare for you, well, then, it's so easy these days with social media and everything else. Just go out and like everything that you can find that's a good voice, and then keep deleting the crap that comes to you on social media, and then and like and respond to the stuff that's good. And I think that's the way to overcome that terror barrier is by changing the voices, changing the story, changing the narrative, but recognizing that most of us, we do. I mean, I would say everyone lives in story, and that's real. And that's not a negative to live in story, but you create your story and you create the story that you want. And then you make the decision, and then you live into the story. And then when you see struggle, which is normal, when you do fail on the way to that story, then again, you don't look at it as something to be afraid of or anything that would disqualify the path. A lot of times we're like, oh, well, I had this big idea and I stuck my neck out and it got, chopped off or whatever, whatever that is. Right. Well, okay, fine. Reattach it and move ahead. Right. I mean, it's just, you just keep going. Les Brown, he said, when at the end of my life, when they come and find me, or when I die, I was trying to remember, I can't remember the quote, so I'm going to paraphrase. When I die and they come to find me, let them find me on that next mountain. I mean, that's where I want to be. I want to be on the next mountain. Jim Rohn says, similar, that, it's, what's the quote? What is it? When my story is written, let the story show my wins, let the story show my losses, but don't let the story show that I didn't compete, that I didn't try, that I didn't, take action. Right. And so, yeah, I think that, that's how you defeat the terror barriers, is voices and story.
Voices and story. I love that. I love that. Well, Andrew, this has been super valuable. I appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion in our meeting of each other.
Yeah.
I just feel so close to you, even though it's been a relatively short period of time that we've actually known each other. We've got so many different ideas and connections as far as from our past, like being late to the game as far as discovering some of these things and putting some of these into practice and getting some of the success that we all, I believe, are looking for. So I know that the conversation is going to be super valuable to the folks that are listening. Is there any parting thoughts, any words of wisdom that you can think of that even just kind of tying a bow on anything that you've shared with so far today?
One of the things I came across the other day, Earl Nightingale talked about that, security and safety do not exist in our life on earth. But most people, spend their lives struggling and searching for security and safety. And, I think I think when you get your mind around that even the life that you think you're living right now, that's in a comfort zone, and maybe you're there because you think that's safe and secure, and you don't want to, you have this idea. I think people have, the daydream kind of fantasy about, whatever that is, more vacations or a different truck or a different car or what, these whatever. And, but it's like a wistful thinking, and it's like, well, if I had, in order to go in that direction, in order to have more, in order to dream big, and experience, kind of a life of adventure, I would have to leave the safety and security that I currently have. And I think that's the biggest false narrative out there. There is no safety and security. Your story is a perfect example. You were at the top of your game. You were very valuable, employee number one, huge success, and as safe as you can imagine in an industry, which, they say that the industries that will always survive are what? Shelter, food, and energy, right? And you're in one of those industries. But there really wasn't true security there. There wasn't true safety. But people stay stuck because they don't want to leave their safety and security, which is not real. It's just not. Where you are isn't real. It's not safe. It's not secure. It could end tomorrow. So I think once you get your mind around that everything is insecure, nothing is safe. And that's a very good thing. That's a very good thing. That means the adventure is just ahead of you. And so, yeah, and that doesn't mean do dumb things and just expect it all to work out. That's also not wise, but at the same time, I think that would be, I think a key to my philosophy is security and safety don't exist on this earth. And so, it's ridiculous to search for it, according to Mr. Nightingale.
And according to Andrew McWilliams.
That's right.
Folks, this has been a great conversation. I hope you found, this has been a lot of fun. I hopefully you'll be willing to come back and to continue on, with this at some point, because this has been a lot of fun. There's so many different directions that my mind is just firing like crazy with different, potential, let's ask him this and let's ask him that, right? But I know that we need to kind of wrap this one up for today. So if folks want to, they're like, okay, who's this Andrew McWilliams guy? Where do I learn more about him? How can I start thinking more like him? Try to reach through some of this terror barrier, think bigger. What are the best places to reach you and learn more about you?
Well, I think that, where people could start is the book that you and I have discussed, Think Big, just that book, because there's lots of authors and lots of stories in there. And I think that it's good to read about other people's experiences because that helps to give you examples of success. So I would say go to the Think Big book, read both our chapters, but don't stop there. Read and click through everywhere you can. The McWilliamsGroup.net is our real estate website. You can find us on, or find me on Facebook and Instagram. We've got business pages and whatnot and so forth. But mainly, reach out through that. Love to have a conversation, would love to have a cup of coffee, would love to do a Zoom call with anyone who has any kinds of questions. And I'm happy to be kind of a voice of experience, but also a voice of optimism for wherever a person's journey is. Because I think we are put here with unlimited potential, and I believe that I am a co-creator with the God that invited me into a huge story, and so I should get about creating. And I'm happy to respond to anybody that wants to have a conversation.
So, folks, take Andrew up on the invitation. Reach out to him, connect with him on the socials. Do you have anywhere on the socials? Are you on Instagram or anything like that?
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram. I think it's Colorado Andrew, or maybe that's Twitter. But I'm not too hard. What you should do is go to the McWilliamsGroup.net website, and then we've got some social media links there. We've got a YouTube channel. If you go to my YouTube channel, you're going to find content that's about real estate, but also about life. There's some videos and some stuff there that's around philosophy and so forth. So you can certainly find it just a few clicks away. Yep.
We'll definitely list all the links and things like that down in the comment section here with the podcast. So definitely appreciate you sharing that. If anybody's interested in grabbing a digital version of the Think Big book, you can go to my website at randywilsononline.com, and you can get a digital version of the book that we're talking about, the Think Big book. We'll also have a link to the hard copy version of it. If you reach out to either one of us, we'd probably be willing, and I'm kind of throwing you out there as far as if you'd be willing to potentially send somebody a signed copy if somebody would be interested as well. And I would be interested and willing to do that too. So feel free to reach out to either one of us.
Yep, be happy to do that.
Yeah, you can get a couple copies. We'll definitely get you a signed copy if you're interested in that as well. So everybody, hopefully you found a lot of value in this conversation today, and just realize, think through, take control, realize that there's a bigger potential possibility for you out there. And it's just on the other side of pushing through the terror barrier, making different decisions, getting yourself surrounded with people like Andrew and the other folks that we have here on the podcast, and just really taking your life to the next level. And I look forward to hearing a lot of the success stories that you have here in the upcoming months and years to come. So until next time, look forward to connecting with each and every one of you very soon. And until then, thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining me on the RichMind podcast. I hope you found a ton of value in this episode. If so, I'd really appreciate a 5-star review, and you can also share it with your family and friends. And as my mentor Jim Roden shared with me, in order to have more, you must first become more. And in order to become more, you must work harder on yourself than you do on your job. So go out there today and work harder on yourself to become more and build the life of your dreams. Until next time, my friends.